Hello, and thanks for tuning in to the 2024 Cybersecurity Predictions for MSPs. I am Rafi. I'm the GM for Cybersecurity at ConnectWise, and I'm joined by Drew. Hey, Drew.
Hey, I'm Drew Stanford. I'm VP of Global Security Operations here at ConnectWise. And Rafi, I was trying to dance to that intro lead.
I know, right?
But I was afraid to go off and then people would see me dancing, and I wasn't sure that worked.
Well, yeah, that was really pumping it up the energy. I love it. So let's keep this going. For all the viewers, we do a yearly prediction on cybersecurity that we post. And this year we thought Drew and I would just discuss this a little bit to make it a little more interactive. Please also join in if you have any comments, if you want to challenge us on this, please do so. Or if you have any questions for us to maybe go in a little more detail on some of the things that we're talking about. Maybe briefly to start out, how we do these predictions is often very sort of threat landscape and technology specific, right? We want to understand for managed security service providers what's relevant for them to understand about the threat landscape, specifically the MSP threat landscape, and the technology landscape as well as it applies to the MSPs. Drew, I think you're in a very special position to do that, with your role. Maybe tell us a little bit about your role and how that kind of qualifies you to talk about these things.
Well, yeah. So if you go back far enough, right? Yeah, I started out owning an MSP, ran it for almost 20 years, but here at ConnectWise, right? I started a security company. It became part of ConnectWise. And then a few years ago, we sat down and we started going, well, what's the next step? How do we add more value to what we're doing? And in that process, we identified some key people across our teams, as well as some others we brought in that were doing some amazing work researching what was going on in the space. And we formed a team that we call the ConnectWise Research Unit, the CRU. And what they do is, rather than wear 5 hats, 6 hats, 7 hats, and work across our security teams and everything else, they focus 100% of the time looking at hunting in the data that we see come in from our customer environments and what's going on in our partners, as well as looking at what's going on in the larger cybersecurity space and saying, how does that impact the SMB space? How does it impact the MSPs or TSPs that are out there? And how do we build protections and processes to be able to communicate back and more effectively protect those partners and their customers from attack?
Right. And I think the other component to that as well that I want to make sure we mention is actually all the research that the CRU does will go automatically into all of our product portfolio, right? So that's sort of the direct benefit there. Now, we're going to be talking a little bit about what's happening in the threat landscape and technology landscape and things like that. And guess what? One of the things that we're not going to necessarily highlight is ransomware, right? Ransomware will just continue. It's here to stay for quite a while. There's just too much money being made by the bad guys with ransomware that would go away anytime soon. They're going to find new ways to break in and continue doing that. So we're not going to talk more about that. But specifically what we're trying to do here is really focus on some of the predictions that matter for MSPs, right? Like what should you take home? How is this actionable? So with that, I'll give you a quick overview. There's 5 predictions we have, and then I'll just give you the 5, and then we'll dive into each of them and discuss them a little bit. So the first one, surprise, surprise, if you haven't heard of AI, if you haven't talked about it with your family, with your friends recently, I really urge you to look at what is happening in AI. So we'll talk about that a little bit, what we see there. The second piece is around IoT and LOL bins. If you've never heard of LOL bins, wow, it's a tongue twister too. We'll talk about that in a second here, what that is. We'll talk about tool consolidation, talent gap. It's not necessarily that new, but it's going to continue in 2024, and it's important for you to understand and be aware of it. We'll talk a little bit about M&A trends, mergers and acquisitions in this space from 2 angles, MSPs and security vendors. And then finally, something that I'm sure you all love and hate, which is compliance and specifically CMMC 2.0. So maybe let's jump in some of these. Let's start with the AI piece. Drew, what do we have in store here?
Well, I think when you look at AI, right, we can start, unless you've been under a rock for the last year. I mean, AI has been around for a while, but as things started really picking up this year, right, in 2023, everybody starts using it. Oh, I can use it here, I can use it there, right? Everywhere you turn around, AI is involved. But the question is, what does it really mean for what we're doing in the security space, right? And what's going on in protecting your customers? Well, I think, one of the things around AI is, and I kind of laugh, right? There's been lots of discussions around it of, well, it's going too fast. Maybe we should just hold off using it, or maybe we should do this here, or maybe we should do that. Well, the truth is the bad guys, they don't care whether we hold off or don't hold off or whatever. Guess what? They're still going to be doing what they can to accelerate their goals and what they're doing around it. So they're building AI into a lot of the process they're doing. We're already seeing different methods and different things that are being accelerated. The time to be able to compromise an environment, the time to turn information and then be able to go deeper into an environment is accelerating every day as we start looking at these new attacks. And Rafi, do you want to talk? And I know that there was an executive order that even came out not too long ago talking about this.
Yeah, I think specifically the fear that's there now with, like, as you mentioned, right, like AI being used by adversaries to improve their ways of attacking systems and organizations, right? And the AI getting out of hand to some degree. Like if you spin this into a little bit of science fiction, then where is AI going, right? And who is governing all that? How do you make sure that the AI is ethical and all these kinds of things? Right? There's so many questions and concerns around that it even got the president's attention. And he put out an executive order to talk about, hey, here's how we need to govern all this AI development a little bit. And there's lots of detail. It's actually pretty long. I tried to read it at some point. It's like, oh boy, there's a lot in there. But really, it's about just starting to put first actions in place to help guide us that are working with AI. And it's specifically also, not just people working with it, but specifically people creating these AIs to provide some guidelines and some boundaries also where to go, how to govern, and make sure that these things are not being abused for bad. Now, look, the cat is out of the bag, right? And these things are available. The bad guys are using AI to some degree. I think we've seen some attacks now, specifically when it comes to polymorphism of malware, right? With AI, it's been much easier to basically change in simple terms so that the signature of a malware, that it still does the same thing, but it looks different, it behaves different. So for the detection capabilities, it's harder for them to detect that now, right? So there's a bunch of things that's happening there. But I think we also have other areas of concern, right? Like deepfakes. Right now, going into an election year, now that could get interesting. I really wonder with the election, how much deepfake activity do we see around the presidential campaign? So that could be getting very interesting. Has the candidate really said these things, or is it a deepfake? And I am sure there's going to be numerous conversations around that, right? What else do you have here?
Another area, Rafi, that I think will be really interesting also, and I think this is one actually for the SMB community that hits real, right? One of the things that comes out with AI and a lot of the tooling that has come out is the ease of potentially taping people that maybe don't have as much technical background or development background or whatever, and all of a sudden they can put together programs. Well, that's great. That's awesome, right? The more we can obfuscate a lot of the work that's done to help people build tooling to help them accelerate their business. That's awesome. The challenge is with a lot of this tooling, right? Also, with lack of expertise comes lack of understanding what good code looks like and what good pieces are. And so I think one of the things we're going to see, and this comes back into, security controls in general, right? And looking at that is, if every company, no matter how big, all of a sudden becomes a software developer because they have tools to do that, right? Now you have more opportunity for bugs to creep in, different things, security 0 days, different things to happen, unless the tooling you're using to write that has the checks and balances in place to do it. And I think one of the things we have to be really careful of, say you're a business owner or something like that, right? If you've got team members that are using these free tools or even pay tools out on the web to put together these programs, how do you know that what comes out doesn't have something buried in it that's going to be a problem for you? So you've got to make sure that you don't just blindly walk into it. Yes, there's benefits and you have to walk through that. Just understand the risk and make sure that you have the people to be able to check it and make sure that you're safe as you walk through those pieces.
It's such an important point. I gave a presentation at Black Hat a number of years ago where I talked about the dangers of AI, and this is exactly the same thing still, where back a few years ago, it was just us using these machine learning libraries and predicting things. Well, if you don't know how exactly that library works and what the input is that needs to go in, you have no idea what's coming out. And I showed some scary examples, and the same applies here, as you're saying, right? For sure. I think there's going to be a lot of controversy about that this year, and an attention on how do we create secure code. And then I think finally on the AI conversation here, it's a lot of organizations, and rightfully so, are worried about all these different AI capabilities out there, right? From ChatGPT to MindJourney to, like, you name it, right? Or Midjourney, and all these different sites where people want to use these capabilities to improve their efficiency and their output at work right now. Well, how do you do that? Well, you take some data that you have in your company and you post it in these websites. Guess what? We call it a data leak, right? And so being careful with what is really being posted into these sites, where do we hook up these AI capabilities into the companies? So understanding that from a chief security officer perspective, or when you're working with your customers, making them aware of that risk that, hey, whatever you post into some of these sites is going to be used and might be used against you. This data might show up somewhere in the public domain at some point, exposed as a data leak. So I think to wrap up, right, the first prediction is really AI is going to be a double-edged sword, I think, this year. Hey, if you're not jumping on the bandwagon, you're going to be left behind. So there's no question. You got to jump on this, but do it safely, to understand what you're doing. And guess what? The bad guys are using it as well. So think ahead of what does that mean for the threat landscape and for your operation when the bad guys are using this stuff. What's number two, Drew?
Well, I think the second one we were talking about, and this is kind of a continuation of things that we've seen grow, but we're seeing, continued massive acceleration, right? Rafi, you mentioned earlier, we weren't going to talk about ransomware, right? Well, we're seeing, ransomware has become, it's the back end, right? The threat actor knows that when they launch a ransomware attack, right, unless they're doing a feint off to the side and they're using it for something else, which happens, right? But most of the time, that's when they've said, I've gotten everything out of this company that I can possibly get. Now I'm going to try to extract the last little bit by encrypting and maybe extorting data and whatever as we go through it, really. But the real attacks, are shifting to what happened before that, right? Once somebody's in a network, whether they got in through phishing or whatever, what are they doing? And, and I think the big continuation we see this year is around IoT devices, and even use of, Rafi mentioned it earlier, it sounds funny, the lull bins conversation, which really just talks about living off the land binaries, which is, you may go, well, I don't know what that is. Well, how many of you have a computer that has PowerShell on it? Or maybe it has Task Scheduler on it, or it has any of those things, right? It's something that's built into the systems you have that a threat actor, when they get into your system, doesn't have to install other tools. They just use something that's already there, and to your defenses, in many cases, it just looks like somebody using the natural tools that are in your environment. Therefore, it's more difficult to detect. It takes a little bit more understanding to be able to see that it's a threat actor using it, as opposed to just your normal, your bookkeeper going in and scheduling a task for later in the day to have a job run, as an example, right? There's all sorts of things around that. But when we start seeing, what's going on there, it's those things. The threat actors have already become very prolific at using tools that you have in your environment, but then also using, IoT devices, whether that be your multifunction units, your copiers, whether they're using the cameras inside of your environment to establish either the opportunity to use them to steal information, or whether it's just to live there and use it as a launching point for another attack. I mean, those are the kind of things we're seeing. I mean, Rafi, what do you see around that area?
Yeah, I know, like the IoT devices, right? The hard piece is you can't put an EDR on there, right? Or like a security tool. It's embedded hardware, right? It's like, but they're running operating systems in certain cases. They're running full Linux stacks, right? Your router probably has some kind of a Linux stack on it. And then I always ask, hey, what's the last time you updated your router's firmware? Guess what? It's probably vulnerable. Like, there's a lot of vulnerabilities coming out of that stuff. And if you don't keep up with these things, that's a problem, right? And those are attack vectors where the bad guys are now in mass going in and compromising these systems. And then, as you said, the living off the land, right? That has obviously posed a little bit of a challenge for the vendor landscape with the endpoint protection tools, but obviously they also, we're trying to stay ahead of these trends, and there's now additional, if you want, like methods in the endpoint protection tools that are helping detect when these binaries are being used for bad and not for good, right? There's still signals and things that you can see that are not normal. But those two things, right? The IoT, you have to have a way to protect and monitor your IoT devices. And that is unfortunately not happening on the device, but going back to the network, probably to monitor what's happening on the network to see if something nefarious is happening to your IoT device, or they start suddenly talking outside and that they shouldn't be talking. So there's a lot of things you can do on the network side to detect attacks there.
Well, and I think Keith in the chat just asked a question about, about attack surface and things like that. And I think one of the things for people to realize, right, a lot of times when you talk about the attack surface of a site, right, or of an environment, so many people focus on what's exposed to the internet. And that definitely, from an attack surface standpoint, is something to be aware of, to understand what's out there, what can be queried, what are the different pieces. But part of your attack surface is also even inside, because if an attacker gets by the gate, gets by the fence, that first level, what are they then going to see? What's the second? What's the third layer? What are those things? And understand, right, what you're exposing at each layer, right? When we start talking about things like zero trust and pieces like that, is understanding what can people access based on the credentials they have at the different levels. And I think when we start looking at, the SMB space, enterprise has really locked this down in a lot of cases, but we still see problems. You see attacks happening all the time, even in the enterprise space, where somebody gets in and all of a sudden they jump over here because the credentials they had access to something people didn't realize that they would have visibility to. So the attack surface conversation is real, from the internet in, right? As we start talking about those levels.
Yeah, and really thinking about it that way, right? And how do you protect IoT devices otherwise? I throw another acronym out there, right? Which is SASE, Secure Access Service Edge, or SSCs, Secure Service Edge. It's a way that it's really hard to protect these IoT devices, right? But how do you help securing their internet connections as well, so that they don't get compromised that way? So that's something to look into if that's of interest in any way, shape, or form. But I think in interesting of time also, let's move on to number 3. We one of the things that we have seen in the enterprise space, for enterprise security space, for quite a while now, if you follow some of the big security companies, is really consolidation, right? If you look at Palo Alto Networks, if you look at a Zscaler, if you look at Cisco buying Splunk for $26 billion or something like that, right? So the big ones are buying, not just other big ones, but also smaller things, and building out platforms, integrating tools together. And I think that's a very, very interesting and important trend, that you will see consolidation of these different tools, which is actually a good thing, right? Because today you probably have 10, maybe more security tools, which means 10 consoles to watch and alerts and whatever. You got to integrate them into either one platform, into your PSA ticketing or whatever it is, right? You want to have one place. You don't want to go to all these consoles and keep up with all the different tools. Now, the challenge, obviously, on the other side is that, well, what about vendor lock-in, right? Everybody's building their own platforms. If you don't play fully in the platform, you don't get the benefits. And that's, I think, where the vendors are going to be very hard pressed to figure out what's their strategy. Either they're like, look, too bad, you got to bet on our platform, which there's value to that. But I think you will see, and that's the stance that we're taking at ConnectWise, that it's an open ecosystem, right? If you have heard of our ASIO platform, it's something where we're driving towards that consolidation, bringing everything into one place, but keeping it open, having APIs, and then integrating third-party tools into that as well. So you can still get the benefit of an integrated platform, but you can still use your one-off products if you want, because you're not just gonna completely move all of your different tooling onto, say in this case, the ConnectWise platform, right? And I think the other trend, and I'm sure everybody out there is in the midst of this, is really, I'm seeing lots and lots and lots of interest around MDR, managed detection and response, right? Getting some of these tools managed by a SOC that you don't have to run yourself. Of course, there's a number of MSPs there. They have their own SOC operation. That's great. Not everybody can afford setting up a 7/24 operation. It's expensive, right? It needs lots of resources. You need to find the right talent. You got to build the processes and so on. And that's something that Drew has a lot of experience with. We have a pretty sizable SOC that he runs. Maybe you want to say something about that a little bit?
Well, I think it's, I think these two issues you're talking about here, one with the consolidation of tools, and two with a SOC and somebody eyes on, right? That's very near and dear to my heart because, right, I'm actually the largest consumer of a lot of our systems inside of ConnectWise, right? Because my SOC team has to use that, and we have the same challenges as any other team that does it. So I'm looking for, how am I using things to automate work, to be able to present one view of an attack back to an analyst who can do work. All of those things are critical for all of us, right? When you're starting to work on it. So whether you're using a team like my SOC that's actually watching those or eyes on for you, doing that, using our tooling to be able to bring that in, whether you're doing that yourself, in any case, you need to be able to pull that together and be able to allow you to quicker identify threats, be able to walk forward into first containment, but then ultimately as you're looking to remediate and walk into those processes as you go through it. But you have the time, that mean time to detection, and then your mean time to response becomes so critical to be able to do that. So again, it's not about having a team that works 8x5 and then having the attacker have free reign to run on your environment with only tools watching it the other however many hours of the day, right? It's about having eyes on that can take action, because you have minutes, right, from when something happens to be able to contain an environment, be able to protect it when an attacker actually finds a way in the door. And you've got to be able to do that. So protection is critically important, right? But detection can't be ignored. You've got to have the tools there to detect, and then the team there to take the right action when those detections happen.
Right. And maybe to add to that, right, if someone is thinking about setting it up themselves, it's obviously great, but with the talent out there, it's just so hard to find qualified people, keep them, especially in a SOC environment, right? A year into, 2 years into, a level 1 analyst is like, okay, what's next, right? I want to move up. And then, well, you have to fill the position, promote them, show them career paths. So there's a lot more than just the technology piece involved. There's all kinds of like showing career path and things like that. So that's very important to consider when you're looking at building out a SOC. We could probably talk about that in a whole separate series here. So consolidation of tools with a talent gap, right? Very important topic. The next one kind of ties into that, and I talked a little bit already about it, which is really M&A trends. And I sort of talked about the vendor landscape already, where we'll definitely see more M&A happening, where the big ones will buy smaller ones, right? Because they want to build out their portfolio, which is actually a great thing for all of us, I think. And then the same thing will happen around MSPs, right? Like we've seen this last year, quite a lot of activity around the PE firms, the MSP PEs that are buying and building these bigger MSPs out there. And that's not going to stop. And obviously that's going to create some challenges for you out there. If you're the acquired MSP or the acquiree, how do you make sure that the company you're acquiring has the same, or has the right security practices, the right standards? How do you assess that? How do you build the right security programs that scale and things like that? So that's something, when you're getting into an M&A conversation, that's going to be important, right? How do you combine the different portfolios and so on? So there's some very interesting things that you might want to think through.
Well, and I would actually add to that, Rafi, and I've obviously worked with a lot of these companies. You have too, right, that are either doing the acquiring or being acquired on either end. I would say, even if you're the one being acquired, right? Your name in the industry is important. Whether you continue to work inside your MSP or your TSP that you're selling, whether you move on to something else, those contacts are still important. So, whenever you're in any one of these deals, right, start looking again at your customer base and saying, okay, how am I providing protections for them today? How will I know that in the future, on either side, whether I'm being acquired or acquiring, that this organization has the path to continue that and continue to grow on it, right? Start making sure, because the last thing you want to have happen is your company acquired and 4 weeks later, right, because things shifted, people shifted, whatever, all of a sudden there was a major issue at one of your customers or more than one of your customers or whatever. So make sure you're asking those questions. Due diligence goes two ways, right? A lot of people that are getting acquired get put into the environment of like, oh, I want to get bought, and all the pressure is about providing the information to make sure that I don't screw up the opportunity to get bought. But you need to look at it on both sides. Do your due diligence on who's doing the acquiring and make sure you're comfortable with that process, that you actually understand, right? What's their position on cybersecurity? How do they do that? It's an important question to ask. And I think playing both ways and understanding it's a partnership, regardless of your ongoing role, is important.
And I think you bring up a very interesting point. Maybe a recommendation: if you're an MSP and you're thinking about getting acquired at some point, make sure your security house is in order, right? Get the right, put a framework in place, follow it, document it, because that at the acquisition, you just hand that over. It's like, look, here, based on this, here's my questionnaire, it's the assessment, here's where we have gaps, here's what we're working on. It makes that acquisition way easier rather than someone coming and is like, what's the security you have, right? And then you're like, I don't know, 42. All right, so with that, last one, CMMC 2.0. It's, gosh, I can't tell you how often I get emails like, hey, are you CMMC 2.0 compliant or CMMC compliant? I'm like, well, okay, let's tease that apart a little bit. What does that mean? So first of all, when is CMMC applicable? I guess maybe we should answer that one first. So it's for the defense industrial base. So it's basically anyone doing any work for that base, and it has to do with the entire supply chain. So if you're anywhere in the supply chain, or if the company you're trying to provide services to, right, is anywhere in that supply chain for the defense industrial base, you have to, in some way, shape, or form, comply with CMMC. And that gets, depending on how deep you are, there's different levels. There's 3 levels now. In the 2.0 framework, they reduced it from 5 to 3, making it a little simpler. And it's basically around 2 pieces, right? It's safeguarding sensitive information, and it's enforcing certain cyber standards. And they're using the NIST framework. There's a number of the NIST components that you have to comply with and show that you're doing that. And I think the other piece that you might want to look at is when you're using certain products, they also in certain cases have to be CMMC certified. Even as a vendor, they need to have a certain certification. What else should we talk about here, Drew?
Well, I think there's a few different things, right? I mean, so CMMC 2.0, which Rafi was just mentioning, right? It's still, the rule sets are being ratified. There's a few things everybody's expecting, I'll say, for that ratification and then to go into effect sometime probably fourth quarter 24, first quarter 25, somewhere in there. We'll see what reality kind of sets in. But the key is this, and this is the thing that I like to really focus on. There's a lot of unique things around CMMC that you need to be aware of and pieces. There's already been certain attestations that had to have already been made for many of you that are probably already involved kind of in that piece that are going to lead forward to, based on the requirements that come out of it, some auditing requirements and things like that are going to go in. But all of us, right? So first of all, just at the general cybersecurity practitioner space, you should already be documenting security controls inside your environment, right? So like level 2 of CMMC pulls out about 110 controls that are involved with CMMC level 2, if that's what you have to attest to. But if you've already got significant controls in place, you've already maybe based on NIST or based on CIS or some other pieces, you've put in a lot of what's there, you're already probably going to have a lot of what you need in place. But you have to make sure that you can audit it, show it, and maintain it. over time. Because this is my soapbox item. It's like, it's not just putting a control in place and saying that, hey, yeah, I met it once upon a time. It's about having an ongoing process to audit it and maintain it and show that you maintain compliance over time. That to me is a real control. The control is not just saying I did it. Right. So it's about putting those things in place. So if you're setting those standards, if you're looking at the real things that are involved in CMMC, you're going to set yourself up for success of what has to be there. So, make sure you're aware of it if you are serving that space. But frankly, even if you're not serving the defense space and looking at it, look at a lot of the standards that are either in CMMC and in other control sets. You need to be putting those same practices in place in your business. I don't care what size business you are. There's certain ones that maybe don't make sense for a really, really small business, but you need to look at them and have your, whether you're doing your security yourself, whether you have an MSP or a TSP that's providing that for you, making sure that you've got somebody that you can have that conversation with, and you're really looking at like, how am I meeting these things? Because trust me, when my IR team gets involved in incident response cases, right, 99.999, and I'll add on a bunch of nines on the end of there, of the cases all come down to a lack of actual security controls in place in the customer that open the door for that to happen. And that's the biggest problem, right? There's nothing new under the sun today. I mean, there are new attacks and new things going on, but generally speaking, they're making use of the same types of problems and lack of controls that have existed for years. And if we'd all just do the right thing, we'd make it a heck of a lot harder on the attackers.
Amen. I don't have anything to add to that. That's perfect. Thank you. All right. So we had the 5 predictions. We have a blog where you can go in and look at these 5 again. We'll have the link here in a second. AI, IoT and load bins, tool consolidation, M&A, and CMMC 2.0. Maybe a couple other things I wanted to briefly mention. We have so one of the things that comes out of this, right? Like, I think the theme that you hear us talk about a little bit is you got to take a proactive approach and participate in all this, right? Like Drew just perfectly summarized it in the end. You have to plan things. You have to continuously learn and collaborate on these different things, right? Like, things are constantly changing. The foundations will stay the same. So these frameworks, build on a NIST, look at ISO or something like that potentially as well. But that's very important that you participate in these things, you stay curious, and you build out these different projects. We're here to help. We want to help. And first, go follow the CRU on Twitter. You get great updates there. We have we do a monthly threat webinar where Drew, myself, and Bryson, also from the CRU, we talk a little bit about the threat landscape, what happens out there, how is it relevant to the MSPs. So tune into that. Great information there that we put out. We're also currently working on the 2023 MSP threat report. So a whole summary of what is happening or what happened in 2023 that's relevant to you. We'll come out with that report pretty soon here. What else do we have? We have a monthly threat report blog that we're putting out as well. So check out our blog. The CRU posts that with latest updates. What am I forgetting? The next threat webinar is on February 15th. So pretty much in a month, so tune in for that if you're interested in continue the conversation there. Anything else I'm forgetting, Drew?
No, I just leave everybody with this, right? As you look at cybersecurity in your role, right? We may have a lot of different people on this webinar with a lot of different backgrounds, right? You may be business owners, maybe technicians, maybe vendors, maybe all sorts of different people that are involved in this. I think the thing that we all need to recognize as we're looking at, what's going to come in this year, as we look at the things that are building forward, is don't let perfection stop you from making progress, right? It's the biggest enemy of progress as we look at it. Look at where you are, evaluate where you are, and start putting steps in place. Start today. Don't wait. I think a lot of times we get on these webinars and we get technical, or we talk about technical things, or we dive really deep. Truthfully, so much of it is simple things to do right every time and put the right processes in place to do it. And I would just encourage you, get started. put the right things in place. If you're a small organization, start there. If you're a big organization, you already have things going, understand where you're at, talk to your team and find out what the next step is, the next thing to put in place. Let cybersecurity be a journey for you, not a destination.
I love it. Maybe briefly you can address like Keith's question here, the ConnectWise move to the ASIO platform. So maybe just very quickly, because I don't want to go too long on this live cast here, but the ASIO platform is this joint platform where all of our tools are going to be living on, and a lot of them are already on there. Like RMM completely runs on the ASIO platform. Think of it as a microservice platform where we have all these shared different components, like your user management, your customer configurations, and so on. And a number of security tools are in there as well. It's like vulnerability management, risk assessment, SaaS security. Now, they just start playing together, like because they're on the same platform, right? Like, you don't have to configure integrations between products. There's a great capability that's called the workflow engine. If you look at our RPA offering, the robotic process automation, actually something very interesting that you should look at as an MSP in terms of automating a lot of the manual tasks that you have. And it's a very, very powerful capability of ASIO. What it brings to you in the end is that workflow engine is a very central point, and we can integrate third-party tools into that workflow engine as well. So you can automate all these different workflows, whether that's from security, like ConnectWise tools, or some other tools as well. And it just brings 1 and 1 it equals 3 or 4 at this point, right? Because you bring everything together, and you're not locked into just ConnectWise products. Of course, our products are a little better supported in certain cases because we build the integrations for that, and for some of the others, might have some starting points, and so on. But really, that consolidation and that one platform. Just think about you as an MSP. You have a ticketing solution, right? You're probably using the PSA for ticketing. Or some ticket tool. Well, that is your central place of engagement for a lot of things. The more you can easily integrate into that, the more like unified your service offering is going to become, and just scale that out to other components as well beyond the ticketing. Yeah, we could talk for a long time about that, but I kind of wanted to mention that. Okay, I think that was pretty much what we had in the questions as well. So thank you very much for tuning in. Thank you, Drew, for joining me today. That was fun. And we'll do this again. See everybody on the 15th of February for the next threat webinar.
Cool. Thank you, everybody.
Have a great day, everyone. Goodbye.